Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here in 153 Net. We are on this Ancient Creation Myth series, and this is our last one. This is episode number 4. So if you have your outline, please take that out. It's very helpful to follow along with us. So after I give the 3 points here, I wanted to ask you if you had any topic that you wanted to go over together in our next series starting in November. And so if you do, just write in the comments below like what you're interested in. For example, like if you want to go over a certain book in the Bible or a certain type of concept in the Bible, or maybe studying a person, whatever it is. Just wanted to see if any of you had any ideas, and I can help sort of facilitate the whole, deconstruction concepts here with the topics that you are interested in. Okay. So let's get right into today's lesson. We're talking about this whole creation myth and really focusing in on Genesis. Why? Because if we don't get Genesis correctly, we're not going to get any of the other books correct. And then, of course, Revelation. So Genesis and Revelation are like bookends. And we have to make sure that we understand both of those, okay? Because if not, then we can get really sidetracked to many other concepts. And we don't want to do that, because here in 153 Net, what are we trying to do? We are trying to get as close as possible to the original author and the audiences of the text of the 66 books of the Bible. That is our job as Bible students. Not what we want to hear, not what we wish it to say, none of these things, but what is it actually saying? And why do we have the Bible here, right? Why is it here? And what do we think the Bible actually is? That's really important, because if so much of Christianity, excuse me, is based on the Bible, then my goodness, if you have the Bible wrong, then you could have Christianity wrong. And that's where we're unpacking all of this stuff. Okay, so here in the summary points of the creation myths accounts, maybe I pushed a button in you where, when you're thinking about the Bible, you're not thinking, no, there's no myth in the Bible. There's no folklore in the Bible. That's like for other genres, other types of books, but not the Bible. Well, I think it's comfortable for us here to say, no, we recognize that in Genesis and probably most of the Old Testament, you're talking about a very, very long time ago. And so they would include myth in their birth account, their Genesis account, their creation account. All cultures did that. And so when we look at the Bible, we should not be, afraid or shocked that they would have that as well. And in the Bible, as a literary text, you're going to see many different types of literary devices throughout it, right? I was talking to somebody this week, and they literally were thinking that the Bible is just one unit. And I had to remind her there's 66 books written at many different times, different authors, different messages, and it's not in chronological order. And she forgot that, okay? Because we're so used to like the Bible is just one unit. And it's not. It's a collection of writings. It's a collection of writings. And we have to also look at the Bible from a literary context. And that's what we like to do here in 153 Net. So, point number 1, when we go into Genesis and the creation, couple of the summaries that we want to make here is that, okay, well, we all were told in Sunday school that, everything was created within 7 days. And we know that that's not true. That Genesis is not a pseudo biology book, pseudo science book. The Genesis is there, right? And the reason why it's in a 7-day motif creation account is because the number 7 was so significant. We talked about this last Sunday, that it is representing perfection and completion, which was the number of God. And so all the Mesopotamian texts have number 7 in it, Egypt as well, because they knew that this number was so important. And so we have that in Genesis, and this number 7 that represents God. It also is saying how the inauguration of the temple would happen in a 7-day feast. So the Israelites put that into their creation story because their creation isn't really talking about a physical creation, but it's talking about their covenant creation. It's talking about their temple creation. It's talking about a people creation of a kingdom creation. That's what we're entering into when we go into Genesis, and that's very important to know. So, and point number two, yes, of course, like I was saying, Genesis would include Mesopotamian creation myths like the Enuma Elish, of course. It would include Egyptian myths, right? There's like 5 to 8 different types of Egyptian myths that we went over a couple of weeks ago. And so these Egyptian myths would be included into Genesis because this is where they come from. They come from Mesopotamia. They come from out of Africa? No, they come from out of Egypt. Remember in all the Old Testament verses, I called my son out of Egypt. This is their Genesis story, right, with Israel. And so, of course, we would have tons of influence of that Egyptian culture in that region and in that geography, because for such a long time, Egypt basically ran that whole Levant area. Okay. And so this influence of Mesopotamian myths and the Egyptian myths should not shock us. It should not, freak us out in any way. And it does not negate the validity of Genesis. It actually is telling us it is genuine, because if it wasn't there, then I would question it, because then that's not of the people. And any ancient document has to come from that people group. And so if you don't have any myths, that would be suspect to me. So it's actually the reverse, logic and reason that I use versus a lot of, literist Christians that say, no, it can't be myth. It has to be real history and real this and this and this. They don't quite understand how ancient texts operate. So within the story of the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian creation, when we take a look at, like, say, the Enuma Elish, and it says when on high, when from above, when it began, we see the same context in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, no, when it began, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And so they're using the same literary phrases as the Mesopotamian tales as well as the Egyptian tales. And then when creation is beginning in the midst of the water, the Tehom, the abyss, Tiamat, right? The sky, and she gets split in half by Marduk. And one half of her becomes a sky and the other half becomes a land. This is their mythology of how to describe it. Except for in Israel, there is no gods. They don't put these elements as gods like the other people around them. No, they're recognizing that these are elements of creation, but that God is separate from creation, right? And so they don't give that, godlike status to those creation elements. But you do see the same effect where they're dividing. The waters from above and the waters from below are separated, and it divides. The same context as the Egyptian creation myth. And the Tehom is there, the same context as the Mesopotamian creation myth. And so they're all in there in chapter 1 and chapter 2. So am I saying that it's completely from them? No, I'm just saying that they would borrow. And I don't know if I want to use that word borrow. I think people say that a lot, and it might not even be borrow. It's just what it was. If it's a part of your culture, you're going to use it. It's not like you're borrowing, it's yours. You own it. So you're going to put it into the text. I think it's that we've been so removed from it that we don't know that that's what they're doing. So we're assuming, well, they must have borrowed from over there. Well, not necessarily. It must be that maybe they just owned it themselves and they viewed the cosmology. That's how they viewed the creation. That's how they viewed the temple. That's how they viewed all those things. Very similar to all of those that lived in Mesopotamia and Egypt in that ancient world. They would all have the same similar cosmology and view of the world. And that's what we're seeing in Genesis. It's a reflection of that. That's why when you read it, it's like, oh my gosh, we are entering into that world. We do not ask Genesis to come and pull and extract out of Genesis. No, you need to speak to my biology, my science, and how the physical world was created. I want you to speak to that. We can't do that. And yes, I think like 99% of Christian denominations is that's how they're using Genesis, is to somehow have a proof text. Well, we need to say that God created everything and we have to use Genesis for that. No, you don't understand. In Genesis or the whole Bible, everyone believed in God. No brainer. So they would have no reason to build a case for God, right? And so that's not why they would use Genesis. But we want to, because in our modern world, yeah, there are a lot of people that don't believe in God. They don't believe in any of that. And so now you have evangelicals or fundamentalists that are trying to use Genesis and make it fit so that they can now go on, a debate and try to prove that there was a God through the scriptures. And that's really misuse and abuse of Genesis, because that's not why Genesis is there. And once we recognize why it's there, then we can use it for its proper purposes. Any comments or questions here in summary points for number 1? Okay. Now, when we go into the document hypothesis, I did another teaching on this a couple months ago, and I thought it was appropriate to bring it into this section here. And this document hypothesis is very important because it was formulated in the 1800s by a scholar. And then you're talking about other scholars that understood this, and they're in all in agreement. So you're talking about it's been around for 150 years. Did you know I never even heard about this in my Genesis class in Bible school? Why didn't I hear this? I'm just, flabbergasted. And on Facebook, on some of these Genesis groups and stuff, they're just now hearing about it, right? So this is showing you how long it takes for this kind of information, from the very top scholars all the way down to the pastors, all the way down to the people, to the Bible, students of the Bible. And it takes so long for this information to trickle down. Well, this is a very old concept. The scholars still are in agreement, okay? Not pastors, but scholars. And they use this document hypothesis to explain how the Torah came into being. This is very important because all of Judaism and the Old Testament is based on the Torah. Everything Jesus said when he said the law and the prophets, the law was the 5 books of the Old Testament. He wasn't talking about thou shalt not kill law. He's talking about the writings of his people. And so this is so important. If we don't know where it came from, how it came together, then the whole thing just falls apart, right? And so in the document hypotheses, what the scholars have discovered through the writings, that you have different narratives that are repeating each other, and they're saying there's a duplication, and they don't know why there's a duplication. And when you look at it, the writing style is very different. And so you have 2 different classes here. You have the J, and this is the Yahweh, sometimes it's a Y, the Yahwist group, between the E, the Elohist group. And then in some of the writings, it starts with this Yahwist concept, right, which is God. But in the other writings, it starts with Elohim, which is a total different way of saying God. And so there's 2 different sources there, and it's not perfect. I wish it was that, 5 chapters here in Genesis and 5 chapters in Exodus and 5 chapters in Leviticus are all Yahwist. But then in the last 3 chapters of Genesis, and the last 3 chapters of Exodus, and the last 3 chapters of Leviticus, it is Elohim. It's all over the place. So there's no pattern there. But what they recognize is wow, there's 2 stories of Abraham going to Egypt. Why? There's 2 account stories of creation. Why? There's 2 accounts of Noah and the flood. Why? And they're constantly seeing this throughout, and they're saying because it came from 2 different sources. And so this is where you get the J and the E. Now you have the D and the P sources, and this is Deuteronomy, Um, yeah, Deuteronomist. And then you have the priestly and the different time frames. The different time frame is that they're saying, well, we can recognize that in the writing, some of the writings in the Torah was actually created after the fall of Israel in 721 BCE. They can see that because of the more modern style of writing. And so they're saying there was a group of people after Israel separated from Judah, that you have a whole collection of writings then at that time. And it's very succinct and different than the priestly time frame when it was after the Babylonian captivity, when they all came back into the land. So you're talking about, 539 BCE, that you have another whole scholarly group of people that are writing and fixing and compiling and editing the 5 books, and they're putting it all together, right? So you have 5 different sources. The scholars do agree that these 5 sources come from these different, the 5 Torah books are coming from these 5 different sources, but they do disagree on how it's coming about. And so that's a continual debate, okay? A continual debate. And some people will say, well, this is so outdated because, none of them can agree on that. Meaning it's outdated because they can't agree on which part is J, which part is P, which part is D. That's why they say it's outdated, but it's not outdated of this concept that there was a whole slew of people and compilers and editors, and it was a community that came together and sat down and decided what was going to be in and what was not going to be in. Okay? When I talk about this right now, you should be thinking, then what is the inspiration of Scripture? What does that look like? What does it mean when we say the Bible is inerrant? There's no errors. What does it mean when the reformers said, oh, the Bible is infallible? It cannot have any mistakes. Who made up those statements? Does the Bible say that, or was it theologians that was putting it on top of the Bible? And theologians that didn't have the data that we have today. And I think they meant well. Let's give them the credit for that they meant well, but they made huge mistakes along the way. And now we have so much more information and data. It's unbelievable. And even as I'm talking to you right now, this is all still being debated. And the one that really stuck out to me, and I put that link on the outline post that I put on there, and what he was saying, that he actually likes the dual origins hypothesis. And I actually agree with him because I see that very distinctly as well. And this is a very new hypothesis. And remember, these are hypotheses. This isn't a for sure thing, just like, Darwinism. That's a hypothesis. That's where all the, scientists and the biologists are coming together, and there's a hypothesis, right? They're thinking this is how the world began, with through a big bang. Now that is being all up for grabs as well. You see how things change as we get more information, and we're okay with that here in 153 Net. Say in 2 years from now, we get more information on this, and everything could change. Probably not much, but some things would change and maybe clarify things for us. That's cool. That's called research. That's called, we're looking towards truth. We're trying to figure out what this ancient document, how it came together. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And so this dual origins hypothesis is saying that in this JEDP sources, okay, and you're having linguists come in and they're saying, why does in this section here they use the word Jews? Because it was a very late writing. Why is it over here they're using the word Hebrews? Because the people that compiled it together, that was before Israel became Israel. See, they were writing it before they came to be known as Israel. Their name was, they were the Hebrew people. See, these are the things that they look at, right? That a normal reader wouldn't be able to look at because, most people, they don't know even the original languages, right? So these are the things that they're looking at. And so in the dual origins hypothesis, what they're saying is that there are two accounts or two duplications because of the nature of the history of Israel. And this is very important because if you don't know this history, then you don't know why any of this even exists. The history is that the 12 tribes split and became the 10 tribes up here, the northern kingdom, the 2 tribes here, the southern kingdom. They were called Israel up here. They were called Judea or Judah, Jews down here, right? And when they split, they had different stories from their perspective. Do you think Israel is going to promote what that the king is going to come from Judea? No. They want to promote that it came from Joseph. Do you think Judah here wants to promote that, it was everything through what, like Moses? No, they want to say it came from Mesopotamia. You have 2 houses, 2 brothers that are fighting, and they're creating their own legitimacy. And this is why we're seeing the 2 duplications. That's one way of explaining it, which I prefer. Another way to explain it is that they're using chiasms. And these scholars still don't know Hebraic literary devices, and they don't know chiasm, meaning that a chiasm is, when you go A, B, C, D, and then they repeat it, D, C, B, A. And it's like a butterfly effect, right? And that's how they're writing. Well, I do see that all scattered all throughout the Bible, but that doesn't explain why there's duplications. That's just a chiasm literary device. So I don't see that as a good point, but some people are using that. And so this other point that I think is really better is that what they're saying is when Israel went out 721 BCE, you have a whole scribal community here that's giving the legitimacy for Israel. Then you have Judah that got taken into captivity in 586 BCE, and they have a whole priestly community, and they're writing their legitimacy. And because of this, you have 2 accounts. And some of these accounts, and say like Joshua, Judges, First Kings, Second Kings, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, they're pretty similar. It's not a real big deal. They're not saying complete opposite things. It's just a repeat. And it's like, what's going on? Obviously, the scribal community didn't want to take it out, so they just included it all together. And what you're seeing is these repeats. And you'll do that when you start reading First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, and then you read First Kings, Second Kings, and say, why are they repeating everything that I just read in First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, right? Because they had all of these compilations, and they were editing it, and they wanted to still keep it in there. And that's what we have. And it's not neat. It's not like a college essay. You have 5 paragraphs and you have 3 points, and you better have a good intro paragraph and a good conclusion paragraph. And that's the format, right? That's the format that we use in academia. Very different than legal community. They have a whole another set of, formatting. But here we have a very ancient text, and they're having like really haphazard patterns. And it's because it was compiled in many different time frames by different communities. They decided what they wanted to add, what they wanted to take out, and they're doing all of this stuff. And then at the end, what do we have? We have the Masoretic text, around 1000 AD, and they're compiling it together in modern Hebrew. It's not even in Paleo Hebrew. And so we have that, and that's what we have right now, is that piece. And we're going off of that manuscript. That's what we have. And we're all trying to figure out, okay, with that, what is it trying to say? You see the limitations of all of this? It's not a slam dunk, folks, once you understand the processes of it. And I haven't even gone into critical textualism, which is, okay, so which manuscript are you talking about? Different manuscripts have different settings and different styles. And then the scholars argue over, well, we think this manuscript is better than this one, or no, this is the most earliest one, and that's why we want to go with this one, right? But it doesn't translate very well. So that's a whole nother category in itself. So when I read a lot of the posts on Facebook and stuff, and it's just funny because I'll see huge debates over different concepts or different words or phraseology, and these guys are fighting over an English translation. And there's no point to fight over an English translation. You have French translations, Korean translations, Chinese translations, German translations, Italian translations, and you put it all together. I'm sure there's so many variations. To fight over that is really redundant and ridiculous. You want to go into the original language of the Hebrew, and then from there, pick your fight with the manuscript that you're using. Most people can't even do that. So why even go there? So the document hypothesis is talking about the duplication in the biblical Torah. Why is it there? They're thinking that it's because of this history. And when you have, a whole kingdom that splits, they're going to have their different stories. And so they've written it down. The priestly, the scribal community have written it down. And now during the Babylonian captivity, they return back to the land. Of course, they're going to need some documents to say, hey, we almost lost our nationhood. The temple was destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar took everything. They don't even have the Ark of the Covenant at this time. Do you understand that? They don't even have the Ark of the Covenant in their temple. Then how is God supposed to fill that temple? This is a crazy piece of it. So for 500 years before Jesus comes, they don't have the Ark of the Covenant. They have a stone in there, but they're still doing the feast. They're still doing the routines. Okay, and they have to have a whole bunch of literature to say, hey, we're a legit nation and God's going to do what he said he's going to do. He's going to bring the Messiah. And when he does, everything's going to be fine. Well, that was a big problem because they didn't know that when the Messiah was going to come, all of their system was going to get burned to the ground because they didn't need it anymore. What do you do at a time when new technology is coming and the old is obsolete? I think Paul talks about this in Hebrews. But there are the people of the old and they want to keep that system in place. They don't want the new. But this is on a mass scale because this is like the temple was their whole culture. It was like that's where you went to go banking. That's where you went to buy stuff, food. That's where you went for the courts. If you had something legal going on, that's where you went to get married. I mean, that's where you did everything. And if all of that gets destroyed, then what do you have left over? Nothing. So of course you're going to fight for the temple system. You're going to fight for it tooth and nail. But they didn't understand what God was trying to do. He was speaking to humanity, right? Even though anyone outside of Judea wouldn't have cared. But he was speaking and saying, you don't need this anymore. You don't need a sacrifice anymore. You don't need the priests anymore. It's time that you realize I'm already here with you. Hello? And so then Jesus comes at that time. Jesus is preaching the same message over and over and over and over and over. And they're like, no, dude, we don't want this message. We like the old. And he's like, no, you don't understand. It's time. It's time. The time has come, right? The time has come. And all of this is going to go away. He said, my words will remain, but heaven and earth, what? Will disappear, right? Meaning the temple system in Jerusalem is going to go away because you don't need this anymore. We're growing up now. You don't need it. And so you're having this kind of push and pull with this the whole document hypothesis and the Torah and how it came about. And we need to study that because this is here to document their existence and how God interacted with the whole group of people, a nation, not just one person. That's very important because in all the other ancient texts, you don't have that. You have just like a guru, and that gives you principles and how to live and how to be enlightened. It's not connected to any people group. This does. and you can actually follow it along. And that's very important to know. Any comments or questions here for point number 2? Okay. So Genesis conclusions, point number 3. It's sort of a repeat of point number 1. The 7 days of creation, if you come next to somebody and they want to say, God created everything in 7 days, and they're wanting to have a talk with you or whatever, you can say, what I'm learning is that the 7-day creation was not a literal 7-day, but they used that number and it was a 7-day creation motif. Oh, what do you mean by that? Well, the number 7 was a number of perfection and completion like God, and they, in that time and culture, the temple was everything, because if you didn't have a temple, you didn't have God on your side. You didn't have God among your people. And that was a big deal. And so the 7 days, it took 7 days of feast to actually inaugurate the temple. And that inauguration meant that the priests would come and they would do all of this ceremony, and then they would invite God and he would fill the temple. This is what we had, the tent of the meeting in Moses. Shekinah glory. That Shekinah glory was a feminine glory, like the Holy Spirit is feminine. They recognize this, right? And that temple had to be glorified, and God's presence had to go in there, right? This is huge. And so that's why the 7-day creation motif is there, not for any other reason. Now, is Genesis giving the story of the whole world and how all humans came to be, and that God somehow created, of the first human out of the ground and like clay, and, made pottery and made him and put him upright and breathed into him and put his spirit in him, and now you have the first man? No, it's Adam is the father of Mesopotamia, according to the Bible. Adam is the father of Mesopotamia. Adam is not the father of the first human being. And they have a very oral culture and mythology that it was this guy, Adam, Adamah, person, and was the headship. And then, of course, you had Eve, the members of that priestly division. So you're talking about this kind of story in Genesis, not of the whole universe and the whole human race, which really, really changes a lot of things. Right there, it changes a lot of things, right? And here in 153net, we recognize that. And so we've shifted quite a bit on, okay, so if that's how it started, then what are we doing today? And what is Revelation talking about? How is it ending? Well, it is their story. And we're recognizing how it began with their story and how it ended with their story. That's what we're reading. Now, if you feel like, gosh, well, that's very disappointing. I thought it was all about me, right? And I think Christianity, that's what we've been told. And so when you have a self-interest in something, you want to see yourself in there. You want to include yourself in there, because now it has meaning. It has meaning. The Bible has meaning for you. And now we're using all these scriptures, pulling it out and saying, yeah, let's use that for, you're going to have a job interview. So I'm going to give you that scripture. Oh, my daughter's going to get married. Oh, let's give her that scripture. Oh, we're having a baby. Let's give her that scripture. Like, this is sort of like what we're doing, and forgetting that this was their story. And through that story, we can recognize how God is interacting with these people. In like manner, we do see ourselves in the Bible, because even though it's not written to us, we recognize there's a universal message. That universal message, though, isn't 613 laws. Somebody just asked me this week, like, do you think that Torah observant is a good thing? And I said, no. And I had explained to her why you don't need to go into Torah observance, and that you don't need to go back into the law of Moses. You don't need to do any of that. And she was shocked, because she thought the more she did that, she was following the Bible, and the Bible is holy, and the Bible is right. And she thought she was getting closer to God by being Torah observant. I said, no, you only needed to know like 5 things out of the Bible. And that's a famous quote from my husband, by the way. He's been saying that for the past 30 years, you only need to know 5 things in the Bible, And that's really it. She was like, what? She was absolutely shocked. She's like, what do you mean? Yeah, that's how well you have to know the Bible to just extract five things, right? I mean, that's very high for you to understand that. So, what do I have here on point 3b? The Bible does not answer the question of, well, how did the whole world begin then, Mercy? You know, we need a source. The Bible says it. That's how it began. I want you to know it doesn't matter according to the Bible. The Bible is not answering that question. The Bible is basically assumes that God did create it. They don't know really how. They're giving a mythology of how they think it came to be. We have that. And we can go into their mindset and their cosmology and say, wow, they thought this way. Okay, does it make it right? Does it make it true? No, that's not the point. It's just there, and you can recognize, like, wow, that's what they thought. That's what they believed at that time. That's very interesting. Oh, just like all the ancients did too. They believed very similar things. Oh, okay. That's what we're reading. Not to answer every single question that we have about the beginning of life and the meaning of life. That's not what Genesis is there for. Point C, I think I answered that. Yeah, and then point D, because we are studying their cosmology and their worldview in their setting, in their place, and in their time. You're talking about 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. What we are reading in the entire Bible is their perspective on the world at that time, their perspective on creation at that time, their perspective on God. This is another thing somebody was asking me this week. Well, I think God is, like a psychopath, and he tells, Moses, to go over here and, genocide and kill all these people. And but then in another verse over here, it says that God is all loving and merciful. Like this is, and God's like this psychopath, and how can he allow all of these horrible things to happen, right? And she's wanting like this big answer to this question that she has of, okay, why is there evil in the world? How can God be love if there is human trafficking, and has been forever, folks? It's not a new thing. How can God be love if there is still slavery going on? How can God be love when there is absolute, hunger going on? Like what, you know, and I said, that's not why the Bible is there. I'm sorry that, you're not getting those answers. But that's not in the Bible. The Bible's not dealing with that. And those writings that you're talking about, where God says, God is like angry or whatever, wrathful here, and then he's all loving over here, that is through the perspective of the Israelites. That's their perspective, and they're putting in writing and writing it in there. So I said, have you ever thought of that? That as you're reading the Bible, you're not reading what's actually true or right, or that God's even represented right, but it's what they thought God was telling them. It's what they thought was happening in their event. And normally, how they're writing is in a crisis moment. This is a national document. This is not an individual document. So they're writing about their country and what they're going through, and how the prophets came and gave them a bad warning, and the people didn't, receive the warning. So, oh my gosh, now God's going to judge us, and this and this and this and this is going to happen because God did, right? Well, they were in a covenant, and it was a conditional covenant. The pact was, if you do these things, I will bless you. If you don't do these things, you know what's going to happen. You're going to go to war. There's going to be famine coming. The crops are not going to be, a big harvest for you. I mean, that was the whole thing, because in that era, a suzerain was like God, and the suzerain would cover everything for that vassal state. That was the whole point. And if that vassal state was obedient to the suzerain, he would bless them. And anytime another, people group would come and want to, go to war, the suzerain would come with his army, and he would protect them, right? Because they were in allegiance and they were paying tribute. So that was the duty. That is how they're thinking of God. So they're writing down how they're thinking of God in there. Now, I don't think I satisfied her answer in answering, in that way. I don't think she wanted to hear it that way, but that is what's happening there. And so when you hear people ask those questions about genocide and there's rape in here and all that stuff, yeah, it should be in there because this is real history. It's one of the things I told my sister when I finally read the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and I was reading through it. And I couldn't even get over Genesis. And I remember I went to my sister, she's 3 years older than me, and I told her, the Bible is really bad, right? And she hadn't read it. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the Bible is really bad. There's a lot of bad things in there. And she's like, huh? And I'm like, yeah. And I was having to explain to her, like, why are we reading this book? And like, it's like all these people are doing really bad things. And like, God's saying, don't do this, do this. And they're not listening to him. And like, why are we reading this? This makes no sense, right? Because nobody at the church was explaining to the congregation what the Bible actually was. And that it's not a philosophical book, it's not an instructional manual, okay, like you would read like in Buddhism or the Bhagavad Gita, right? And the writings there is very different purposes for that. And so basically, the Bible, you're reading history. And who loves history? Nobody. I love it, but I know 99% of people that I talk to, they can't stand history. It's so boring. But when you actually get into it, you're like, oh my gosh, if you don't know history, you don't know nothing. That's what you're reading, folks, in the Bible. This is why I love the Bible. I enjoy the Bible. It takes a tremendous amount of work to understand the Bible, because I'm assuming that you already have a relationship with God, and that you're not looking in the Bible to give you something religious to hold on to. Shouldn't you already be walking with God? Shouldn't you already be talking with God? Doesn't the Spirit of God live in you? Aren't you, this is a dynamic thing. You think of any relationship, it's very dynamic. So that is continuing, correct? Well, I'm just saying that the Bible is true too. It's just the way it's been used in Christianity is completely messed up. And that's why we're here, to undo the mess of what the Bible is and to see it and to have the integrity of the Bible still in place and to put the Bible where it needs to be. Because the Bible, there's a limitation to the Bible. The Bible is just a historical piece there. There's a lot of universal truths that we can extract out of there. It takes a lot of discernment and wisdom to do that. But that's mainly what the Bible is there for. This other piece of your spiritual walk and your walk with God, that's up to you. That's up to me in our personal walk. And then as we come together as a community, we talk about our relationship with God. We talk about like our spiritual lives. We talk about the things that concern us, the things that we're confused about. We talk about those things. And that's why community is so important, because you're always going to need community for that. And it's beautiful when you have people that have like hearts and like minds and they come together, and especially God being the center, right, of their lives. It's not like, hey, I'm just living for me and, whatever, and I just want to be successful. And, you know, no, it's like, no, God is important to us. And we want to walk with God. We want to know this God. We want to teach that to our children and to their children and children, because we think it's a benefit. We think it's necessary. We think it's a core foundation piece of who we are. And we want to celebrate that. And to come in a community to then share those experiences, that is what house church needs to be. That's what it was supposed to be. Not to make a religion out of it, not to make a ritual out of it, not to be religious about it. Did you miss so and so, or did you miss this, that, and then we become all legalistic about it. That's how churchianity came to being. We don't want that. It's about relationship and community. And it's a beautiful thing when people come together to celebrate God centric living. And that's what we're about here in 153 Net. Any comments or questions on point number 3? Right. So, I'm going to do a post on Monday and ask you guys what topics, what concepts, what you want to learn in the Bible, and that we will, if I get any, then, I can help you in that process. So if you have anything, put it down there. And, thank you for joining us here today. And we will see you next Sunday.